I always knew something was off when the morning silence felt too perfect. The birds chirped, the breeze hummed, but something crucial was missing. The rhythmic rustle of Clover's steps near the feeding station. It was like a ghost town in the part of my farm where she usually roamed. My gut tightened. I whistled once, twice, but no familiar rustling came from the woods. Clover always came. She was practically trained at this point. A wild creature that had somehow become family. I pulled out my phone and checked the GPS tracker I had fitted around her neck last fall courtesy of a state-funded wildlife research program. The signal showed she was still on my land, but stationary, motionless. My pulse picked up. Deer didn't just stay still for that long, unless something was wrong. Boots crunching against the damp morning grass. I followed the tracker's coordinates, my mind already cycling through worst-case scenarios. Had she been injured? Caught in a poacher's snare? God forbid. Had one of those idiot homeowner association residents ignored the property lines and taken a shot at her? I muttered a curse under my breath. The closer I got, the more dread clawed at my chest. The tracker's last ping was near the creek at the edge of my land, right where it met the backyards of Oak Estates, the hellish suburban development that had sprouted up in the past decade, ruled by the tyrannical homeowner association queen herself, Deborah Whitmore, or as everyone called her, Karen. I stopped short. The ground was disturbed. A freshly dug mound of dirt sat near the tree line, just a few feet from the creek. My stomach sank as I dropped to my knees and clawed at the soil. First I found the GPS collar, the strap cut clean through. Then I found the blood-soaked foliage. Clover was gone. Someone had shot her and buried the evidence. A red mist filled my vision. My hands curled into fists as I stared at the cut collar. This wasn't some freak accident. This was deliberate. This was personal. I stormed back to the house, rage simmering just under my skin, and yanked open my laptop. There was only one place to check first. The Homeowner Association Estates Ho Facebook group. A cesspool of neighborhood snitches, over-enthusiastic rule enforcers and people who thought having a no-fun policy was a personality trait. And there it was. A post from Karen herself, time-stamped last night. A grainy photo of her grinning like a damn psychopath posing next to Clover's antlers. A hunting rifle in one manicured hand. Trophy hunting in my own backyard. Sorry, Bambi. Survival of the fittest. Varnish. My chair scraped against the floor as I stood so fast, I nearly knocked it over. She was bragging. She had no clue what she had just done. No clue that this wasn't just any deer. No clue that she had just illegally killed a research animal. I cracked my joints. Time for war. I grabbed my keys and made the drive to Oak Estates, rolling into the pristine, soulless neighborhood that reeked of freshly cut grass, overpriced SUVs, and a general lack of happiness. The Homeowner Association Clubhouse was hosting one of their routine morning meetings, where residents gathered to hear Karen dictate her latest unnecessary rules. No flags of any kind, no mailboxes that weren't pre-approved, no dogs over 20 lb, and now, apparently no protected wildlife. I pushed open the doors and all conversations halted. The room was filled with retirees and pastel-colored sweaters and middle-aged homeowners who lived for passive-aggressive complaints about lawn height. And at the center of it all, in her self-appointed throne, sat Karen. Blonde, bob perfectly in place, nails gleaming, expression smug. I didn't waste time. I walked straight to the front, pulled out Clover's GPS collar, and tossed it onto the table in front of her. Justify this. Karen blinked, then looked at the collar like it was a used tissue someone had thrown at her. She wrinkled her nose. I have no idea what that is. I leaned in, my voice sharp as a dagger. That's the tracking collar from the deer you shot. The one you buried in my woods. The one that was part of a state wildlife conservation program. Murmurs spread through the room. Even the diehard Homeowner Association loyalists shifted uncomfortably. Karen, however, merely sighed, adjusting her sweater. Oh, please. It was a deer. They're practically pests. She sneered. If anything, I did you a favor. I nearly choked. A favor? A favor you slaughtered. A protected animal, I snapped. That deer had a GPS tracker on it. Do you even understand what that means? The state is going to see exactly where she was last before she died. And guess whose backyard that is? Karen Grin faltered for the briefest second. The state isn't going to do anything, she said, folding her arms. It was on my property, and I don't see a problem with hunting a menace. A slow grin spread across my lips. Well, let's test that theory, shall we? I pulled out my phone, and with a single tap sent the GPS data directly to the local game warden. I just sent everything over. I'd love to see you defend yourself when they come knocking. Karen's face drained just slightly before she forced a laugh. You're being ridiculous. It's not like I shot someone's pet dog. My jaw tightened. She was more than just a deer. Silence settled over the room, thick and oppressive. Even the people who usually worshipped Karen as the homeowner association Queen Bee looked uneasy. Finally, she waved a dismissive hand. Whatever. This meeting is over. She grabbed her purse and stood trying to make an escape. I stepped in front of her. Oh, no, Karen. This is just getting initiated. The moment Karen stormed out of that homeowner association meet, I knew this wasn't over. She thought she could shrug off what she did, but she had no clue what was coming. A person could wiggle their way out of homeowner association fines and petty neighborhood disputes. But poaching a protected animal, that was a whole different league, and I had the proof to make sure she felt every ounce of justice coming her way. I wasted no time. As soon as I got back to my truck, I called the local game warden's office. The woman on the other end of the line didn't even let me finish my sentence before her voice sharp with interest. A GPS-collared research deer shot and buried. That was critical. Within minutes, they dispatched an officer to meet me at my farm. By the time Officer Reynolds arrived, I had everything laid out. The GPS tracking data, screenshots of Karen's ridiculous Facebook post, even pictures of the fresh burial site where I found Clover's collar. He examined everything carefully, nodding as he swiped through the evidence on my device. This is bad, Reynolds muttered. Real bad. Yeah, tell me something I don't know, I said, crossing my arms. She didn't just hunt outside of season. This is a research animal. That's felony level. I could have kissed the man. Instead, I grinned and leaned against my truck. So what's next? Please tell me it involves Karen regretting every life decision she's ever made. Reynolds sighed and shook his head. Well, first we'll have to conduct an official investigation. I'll need to get a warrant to search her property for the remnants. I didn't love the sound of that. A warrant meant waiting. Waiting meant time for Karen to do what she did best: squirm her way out of trouble. Any way to accelerate this? I asked. Reynolds gave me a pointed look. Unless she confesses or does something stupid to tip us off, we have to follow the legal steps. Karen doing something stupid wasn't out of the question. In fact, it was almost guaranteed. I didn't have to wait long for her to start digging her own grave. Less than an hour after I left the homeowner association meeting, she was already in damage control mode, spinning a web of lies on the Oak Estates Facebook page. According to her new version of events, she had no idea the deer was special. She claimed it was hostile, that it had been charging at neighborhood pets and children, forcing her to take action for the safety of the community. I snorted so hard reading that post I nearly spit out my coffee. Clover aggressive? That deer was about as intimidating as a golden retriever with a head cold. If anyone in the neighborhood had ever seen her, they knew Karen was deceiving through her veneers. But Karen had power, and power made people stupidly loyal. A handful of homeowner association members jumped to her defense, nodding along like sheep. But something interesting started happening. More people started pushing back. Neighbors I never expected to speak up suddenly chimed in. People were digging into Karen's past, pointing out all the time she had lied, manipulated, or outright intimidated people into getting her way. She charged me $200 for painting my door blue, said it wasn't community approved. She reported my son's lemonade stand for violating food safety regulations. He's 7. She cut down my magnolia tree because She didn't like how it blocked her view. One comment in particular caught my attention. A woman named Lisa claimed Karen had threatened her with a fine for feeding stray cats in the neighborhood. She told me if I wanted to live with animals, I should buy a farm like that hick outside the homeowner association, Lisa wrote. Well, looked like Karen had more enemies than she thought. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. Karen was losing her grip, and all I had to do was give one good nudge. The next morning I was woken up by the sound of a truck pulling into my driveway. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside, expecting Reynolds again. Instead, it was a news van. A short woman with a determined look and a microphone stepped out, eyes bright with the hunger of someone who smelled controversy. "Jack Landry?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Who's asking?" "Jenna Carter, Channel 5 News. We got a tip about a protected research deer being illegally hunted by a member of the Oak Estates Home Owner Association. Would you care to comment?" I let out a slow whistle. Someone had sent the media after Karen, and I had a very strong suspicion about who. I led Jenna and her crew to the spot where I had found Clover's remains. I walked them through everything: her tracking data, the conservation program, and of course, Karen's now notorious Facebook post. By the time we finished, Jenna looked like Christmas had come early. "This is massive," she said, shaking her head. "A protected animal and homeowner association president abusing power and social media evidence. This story writes itself. Make sure you spell my name right," I said with a smirk, "because this is just getting begun." Sure enough, by noon, the story had spread. Karen's smug face was plastered on the news, right next to an image of Clover in the wild, looking peaceful and innocent. The contrast was devastating. Karen, of course, reacted exactly how I expected. She doubled down. She went live on Facebook ranting about rural lunatics and overblown media hysteria. She called me a liar, claimed I was harassing her, and insisted she was the real sufferer. It was the worst possible move she could have made. The wildlife conservation community caught wind of her nonsense and erupted. People flooded her social media with fury. Conservationists, animal lovers, and legal experts all chimed in, pointing out every law she had broken. Then the best part happened. The state's Department of Wildlife Enforcement issued an official statement confirming they had launched an investigation. Karen was collapsing, and she knew it. That night, just as I was enjoying a well-earned beer on my porch, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of an email. The email was from the Oak Estates Homeowner Association board informing residents that an emergency vote was being called to remove Karen as president. Below the screenshot, a single message was typed: "Thought you might want to see this. Consider it a thank you." I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't have to. Karen had ruled Oak Ridge Estates with an iron grip for years, but now even her most loyal followers were abandoning ship. She was done. I took another sip of my beer, letting the moment settle in. And tomorrow I was going to make sure it only got worse for her. Karen must have known she was failing. The signs were all there. Her once loyal homeowner association followers were murmuring behind her back. The media was tearing her reputation apart. Wildlife advocates were calling for her prosecution. But instead of cutting her losses and keeping her head down, she did what Karen always did. She made everything worse. The morning after the Emergency Home Owner Association vote was announced, I woke up to find a city inspector parked outside my barn. The guy barely made eye contact as he handed me a notice stating that my property was being investigated for multiple zoning violations. Apparently, Karen had reported me for illegal farming activities and unauthorized animal enclosures. The irony was hilarious. My farm had been here long before Oak Ridge Estates even existed. If anyone was violating zoning laws, it was the homeowner association that had built their cookie-cutter houses too close to agricultural land. I sighed and leaned against the fence, watching the inspector awkwardly flip through paperwork. "Look, I know who sent you," I said, "and I know this is all nonsense. You want to waste your time? Be my guest. Just make sure to spell my name right on the report." The guy muttered something about just doing his job before driving off. I shook my head, already pulling out my phone. If Karen wanted to play unfair, had no problem getting my hands in the dirt. I spent the next few hours making calls first to my lawyer, just in case Karen decided to increase her harassment, then to the local wildlife enforcement office, checking in on their progress. The case was moving forward faster than expected. Karen was officially under investigation for unlawful hunting of a protected species. She had been asked to turn over any remains of the deer, but predictably, she refused to comply. That only made things worse for her. By lunchtime, another shock hit. The Homeowner Association Board announced that Karen was being suspended as president pending further evaluation. It wasn't a full removal yet, but it was clear they were trying to detach themselves from the chaos. Without her position, Karen had no real power left. The walls were closing in. That afternoon, I decided to pay her a visit. Not at her house. I had no interest in setting foot on her perfectly trimmed lawn. Instead, I waited until she left to run one of her errands and intercepted her in the grocery store parking lot. She saw me before I could even say a word. Her face contorted into something between rage and panic, and she practically hissed at me as she shoved a shopping cart between us. "You need to stop harassing me," she snapped. "This is bordering on fixation." I crossed my arms and raised an eyebrow. "You buried a protected deer in my woods and then reported my farm for fake violations. You really want to talk about fixation?" Karen scoffed, tossing a carton of overpriced organic milk into her cart. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Oh, I think you do see the game. Warden's office just confirmed that you're refusing to cooperate. And from what I hear, they're not taking that lightly. Something about felony charges." She flinched. It was brief, but I saw it. A crack in her armor. "You have no proof," she said through gritted teeth. I grinned. "Oh, but I do. GPS data, screenshot, witness statements. And let's not forget your little social media post bragging about your prize hunt." I leaned in slightly. "You can either hand over what's left of the deer and take whatever slap on the wrist they're willing to give you, or you can keep digging yourself into a hole you'll never get out of." Her hands clenched around the cart handle for a second. I thought she might start screaming. Instead, she let out a shaky exhale and turned away. "Get out of my face," she muttered. I took that as a victory and walked off, leaving her to wallow in her own mess. The next day things got even worse for her. News broke that the Department of Wildlife Enforcement had officially obtained a warrant to inspect her property. The Homeowner Association Board, realizing they had been backing a sinking ship, issued a statement formally removing her as president. Suddenly, all those people who had feared her rage were coming forward with their own horror stories. It turned out Karen had been skimming homeowner association funds for years, using fines and fees to support her own lifestyle. Once the authorities started digging, they found even more dirt: tax fraud, misuse of homeowner association funds, even a shady deal where she sold off community property for personal gain. Karen wasn't just losing her reputation, she was about to lose everything. The day the wildlife officers arrived to examine her backyard, I made sure I was there to watch. She stood on her front porch, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. A few of her former allies were watching from a distance, muttering among themselves, pretending like they hadn't spent years defending her. When the officers started searching, it didn't take long to find what they were looking for: the remains of the deer. Karen lost it. She started screaming at the officers, at me, at anyone within earshot. She called it harassment, a setup, a scheme. She threatened to sue, but none of it mattered. The evidence was undeniable. She was arrested on the spot. Watching her get shoved into the back of a police car was the most satisfying thing I had seen in years. But the best part, she knew it wasn't over. She knew this was only the beginning of her ruin. Over the next few weeks, the homeowner association completely collapsed. With Karen gone, the community turned against itself, fighting over leadership, finances, and years of shady dealings. In the end, the entire association fell apart. The homeowner association disbanded, the ridiculous rules were eliminated, and the neighborhood finally got a taste of liberty. As for me, I didn't Just sit back and enjoy the show. I went a step further. Karen's house, the one she had used as her personal fortress, went up for sale not long after her arrest. Most people wouldn't touch it, given the disgrace surrounding her name. But I didn't mind. I bought it dirt cheap, and then I turned it into a wildlife education center. The irony was perfect. The very place where Karen had ruled with an iron fist, the house where she plotted against neighbors and destroyed everything she didn't like, was now a haven for the very animals she had despised. The grand opening was a success. Families brought their kids to learn about conservation efforts. Volunteers from the state's wildlife program came to give talks about local ecology. And right in the front yard, where Karen once scolded children for stepping on her precious grass, stood a statue of a deer, a tribute to Clover. One evening as the sun set over the property, I sat on the porch and watched a group of kids admire a new fawn that had been spotted near the forest. A newspaper fluttered in the wind beside me, the headline catching my eye: Former Home Owner Association President Sentenced Poaching Case Ends in Legal Disaster. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the moment sink. And karma was a beautiful thing.